Griffin, great to have you today on the Legal Lunch Byte. I don't know if we've had you on here yet, but I always appreciate a chance to catch up with you and talk about California cannabis, especially. There's been a lot going on in the U.S. as well. So why don't we start with you giving us a little bit of background on yourself professionally, how you got into the industry, and then some trends, what you've been seeing lately.
Sure, thanks, and it's nice to be here too. I'm a corporate lawyer in our firm and partner, and I've been practicing law since 2015. Joined the firm in 2018, and just sort of happened to be at the right place at the right time. When I joined in 2018, the cannabis industry in California was really just starting to take off because licensing had opened earlier that year. And so there wasn't final regulations. We had temporary emergency regulations and proposed various sets of proposed regulations on the table. And I got to help businesses get licensed and then get operational and everything else from that point on. So I just came in at the right time. And I tell people now, when I had started, we would get, I don't know, 5 or 6 questions a day, but just random business things. Can I have cameras stored off site under the regulations? Can my delivery driver leave the facility at 5:45 in the morning, even though deliveries are only permitted from 6 a.m. to 10 p.m. and things like that? And what we would have to do is just go look at the temporary emergency regulations and say, well, here's what they say. Here's what the proposed regulations say, which could become law in the near future. Here's what the local law says, and if anything. And by doing that, we really gained a lot of knowledge about what the regulations look like as they were being made and how they ended up being codified at the end of the day. And, over the years, we've helped, I don't know, hundreds of businesses from every stage. I mean, sole proprietors just starting and getting licensed through some of the biggest public companies in the world, selling businesses and buying businesses in just massive transactions. So we really run the gamut of work we do here on a day-to-day basis. I'm doing license agreements. I'm helping people right now, probably 3 or 4 different acquisition or sales of business transactions, a lot of leasing, and just the gamut of regulatory advice and everyday corporate governance and structuring needs.
How do you describe the change of the industry from the time you've been into now? You feel like it's gone through a maturation process? Is it really more advanced than when you started, or is it? I'm just curious what you've seen, because I in my own practice I describe it a certain way to people, and I don't want to give you my answers. I want to hear what you have to say about that.
Well, I mean, the industry back when I started, there was just an seemingly endless pile of money being poured in, right? Because people thought this is the green rush, and I'm going to make millions of dollars if I put in, a couple 100,000. I'm going to come out a millionaire, and that just didn't turn out to be the case. A lot of businesses raised funds with the understanding or hope, really, that federal legalization was right around the corner, and a lot of the tax problems that are based on federal illegality would just go away, and that didn't happen, right? It's been 6 years. You also have a lot of other problems, which we'll probably get into in a few minutes, that just made it really tough to make money. And so back then, I mean, we would help people who were considering investing in cannabis businesses vet the company that they were looking at, and in a lot of cases we would say this is a very risky I mean, they're all risky investments, of course, but some of them more so than others. And a lot of people would just be like, well, let's see what happens. And that eventually stopped happening, right? People became very cautious about the industry as it wasn't doing so well. And if anything, we would see more infusions of capital via debt, right? Where people were taking less of a risk than just buying a piece of the business. And that sort of increased for a while. Now, I think as the law seems like it's going to change soon, that will probably change. But the last couple of years have been tight for a lot of people, and a lot of cannabis businesses in the state, I mean, countrywide, have just closed their doors.
So what do you see as coming down the pipe in California particularly, and then we'll move on to federal changes?
Sure. So I would encourage everybody to join a webinar I'm doing on June 26th at noon Pacific. You can sign up for it if you just Google it. It's called Can the California Cannabis Industry Be Saved? And I'm co-presenting with a guy named Hirsch Jain, who is sort of a powerhouse in the industry. And he and I have crossed paths many times We're going to be talking about all the problems the industry is facing, and there are many. I write about them all the time in the Canalaw blog, from excessive state taxes to zero enforcement against the massive, I mean, truly massive illegal industry that is just festering, to all kinds of other stuff that's, making the industry tough. Um, so I don't see a lot of changes at the state side coming up. I mean, there's some, but I don't think they're going to have a lot of impact compared to the federal law change, which, everyone probably realizes right now. The DEA recently issued a notice of proposed rulemaking to reschedule cannabis from Schedule 1 to Schedule 3. Unless you're a cannabis attorney, you probably don't understand exactly what that means. But basically, what that means is, you have a hierarchy of schedules on the Controlled Substances Act. One, which is where cannabis is for, the most dangerous and least useful drugs like heroin. And every schedule you go down becomes less, I don't want to say less illegal, but less regulated to some degree. And the problem with Schedule 1 is that when something's on it truly just cannot be, the physicians can't prescribe it. It can only be researched under very tight protocol. Anywhere else, it becomes sort of open, to a degree it's not now. It's not going to mean, it's really not going to make any difference for the average Joe who's caught, on a federal property possessing marijuana. But what it's going to do for cannabis businesses is eliminate, something called 280E of the Internal Revenue Code, which prevents businesses from making most standard deductions on their federal taxes. So overnight, I mean, on a prospective basis, for sure, it's gonna open up a lot of potential investment by people who are not going to be as scared of, these extremely onerous taxes. I think the one problem, though, is that states may try to fill the gap a little bit, or at least be disincentivized from trying to make their own state taxes less, onerous, for lack of a better term.
It's really interesting. I hadn't realized that the moving from Schedule 1 to Schedule 3. I've been keeping one eye on our internal cannabis discussion threads, but I didn't realize that moving it to Schedule 3 would have the effect of letting these businesses take advantage of, or at least not run into 280E anymore. Does that happen just by virtue of it being moved on the schedule, or were there accompanying regs that specifically said that?
Well, 280E itself, if you read it, it's pretty short. It's like a paragraph. It says it applies only to people who trafficking Schedule 1 or 2 narcotics. And so, we've known for a while that the DEA was going to make a recommendation, or I'm sorry, we didn't know for a while. We knew for a while that the HHS had made a recommendation regarding rescheduling to DEA, and initially people were concerned that they might just put it on Schedule 2, if anything, which wouldn't have changed that. But this is the real big change of rescheduling. A lot of people out there are saying, "Oh, this is just legalization." It's really not. All the state legal markets are not going to be legal overnight. There's some concern that by virtue of being placed on Schedule 3, DEA and FDA regulations are now suddenly going to apply and be enforced. I kind of have a hard time believing that, because why would the federal government go from effectively ignoring what was on Schedule 1 to putting it on Schedule 3, only to then, issue some sort of prohibitive enforcement against it? It just doesn't make a lot of sense to me to spend all this money to do that. What I think is more likely to happen is that we'll get something like, the Cole memo, which was a 2013 memo under the Obama administration in the Department of Justice, saying basically that the federal government would take a hands-off approach to the state legal market if a few certain metrics were achieved. And so I think we'll see something like that in the near future. Although, again, it's anyone's guess at this point what that would look like.
Right. And then it's been a while since I read 280E. I remember thinking it was probably the shortest provision of the tax code I've ever read. It was interesting to look at it and just understand it a bit. And so now with the reschedule, that has the effect of letting cannabis businesses take advantage of deducting money spent on the cost of goods sold, right? Isn't that the foundational issue? So they couldn't deduct it before, which means that they had fewer deductions means less bottom line revenue. And so this does have the effect of increasing that overall pot for them. But like you said, what's a typical, like in California, I know you practice a little bit in Washington as well. What's a typical state tax percentage that's affixed to all these goods as they're sold? I mean, is it 20%? Is there more than 20? I can't even remember now.
So just a little correction on 280E. I mean, what it did, it says basically no deductions shall be made, but cost of goods sold in some cases can be deducted. And you've seen a lot of insane business org charts over the years in efforts to try to get around 280E. And I think like one of the big things is that sort of thing doesn't really need to happen anymore. A lot of the problem with the cannabis industry is you get these hyper complicated transaction structures just in general for a lot of reasons. And that the more complicated something is and the more complicated the hierarchy corporate structuring is, it's just more chances of disputes and things failing. At the state level in California, we had two taxes for a while. There was a tax on cultivation and an excise tax. That got streamlined last year. And so now there's a 15% excise tax on retail sales, which is a lot. I mean, it's not nothing. And the big complaint is when the tax system here was changed up, it effectively allows for taxation on taxation because you also have local tax too. So cities here, you have licenses in California at the state level and at the local level. The local level generally has a gross receipts tax. So it's 1% or 5% of gross receipts. I've heard as much as 10%, which is truly crazy. And then coupled with a 15% excise tax, it just makes doing business really hard. The excise tax also is going up to 19% next year. And my thought is that there's obviously a lot of lobbying against that, but what incentive does the state have now that the federal government is eliminating 280E? I can see them just saying, hey, you're getting tax relief elsewhere. We need this money. So sorry, we're just going to leave things as they stand. And so, I mean, we have a pretty bad tax situation here at the state and local level.
It's very interesting. And I know you've looked at other states a bit too. Would you say that California tends to be harder to do business for cannabis businesses than other states?
I mean, it's interesting because every state is so different in how it's regulated. Some states, will have, I think Utah had maybe 8 retail licensees or something in the entire state. And they have caps. California didn't do a cap on any type of licenses at the state level. But what ended up happening is when we legalized cannabis back in 2016, the voter initiative said that cities can basically decide to ban or limit cannabis activity, and a majority of cities decided not to allow retail. And so what's ended up happening, and even in the ones that did, a lot of them might say we'll have 2 or 3 businesses, becomes highly competitive. Hundreds of thousands of dollars can be poured into a competitive application, and you might be up against 30 people for 2 licenses. But the real problem here is that there's essentially deserts of retail. So a lot of those retail dispensaries are concentrated in places like LA, San Francisco, San Diego, big cities, right? And there's a huge amount of cultivation, distribution, manufacturing that is in excess of what these places have capacity to serve. So had the state allowed retail sales or forced localities to adopt it statewide, I think the things would be a lot less extreme. But we have oversupply at the cultivation level and then undersupply at retail, so it makes it tough. We also have a massive illegal market. Back in 2019, when I started writing about that, there was an estimate about 3,000 illegal businesses. Today, I'm sure it's more. I've heard something like 2 to 3 times the size of the legal market. And I analyze, every quarter the state puts out enforcement data, and they try to sort of tool it in a way that makes it look like they're doing a lot. And I analyze it on our blog. I mean, you can see the numbers in most fields are going down. I think the last quarter they did 21 statewide search warrants in a 3-month period, which is, considering the size of the illegal market, is literally a drop in the bucket. Not exaggerating here. So we have a lot of unique issues. I mean, if you go to other states, they're actively enforcing against the illegal market while trying to make the legal market easier. Here, it seems like they're not enforcing, and at the same time, they're not making it easier to get into the legal market. So you got to do one or the other, I think, and the state's not really wrapped its head around that yet.
That's great. Super interesting. Well, we're at our 15 minutes. I want to thank you for spending the time. I think people will
Yep.
be very interested tuning into your webinar at the end of the month.
Hmm.
And definitely we'll catch up again as things continue to progress.
Sure.